So I made a video wherein I said I didn't care about men, and Barbar responded to that, and I responded to his response, and he responded to my response to his response. So now I'm responding to his response to my response to his response to the video where I said I didn't care about men.
Now, for future reference, I don't think it's a very good idea to make statements like "I don't care about men." It is most certainly not a reasonable thing to infer that someone who is part of a group or organization calling themselves Men's Rights Edmonton will have some sort of compassion for men or care about issues affecting men on some level. I know you've already heard this argument, but it's an argument that is sound and that I don't think you've countered very well.
Let me counter that right now. You say it's not unreasonable to infer, though later in the video you say it's not unreasonable to expect, that someone working with a group called Men's Rights Edmonton care about or have compassion for men. I would say that it's not unreasonable to expect that an entity called Men's Rights Edmonton advocate for the rights of men and does so within Edmonton, and the most cursory investigation into our activities will show that we have. I do think it's unreasonable to place expectations on another person's motives, and that's the point that I'm trying to make with all this.
And we're going to get to that in a bit, but first let's get to the fact that you state in your video that you, quote, stated that you don't care about men for the purpose of provoking the self-righteous morality policing section of the MGTOW phenomena into taking all kinds of ill-informed pot shots at you. So Nick, in saying this, you essentially admit that you said something inflammatory to get a reaction out of an online community for the purposes of provoking them, which is, by the way, the definition of trolling.
No, this is trolling.
Sorry, I'm such a rapist.
It's not your fault you were born in that.
It's not okay.
But it's hilarious.
No, it's not.
Yeah, it is.
Rape isn't funny, you asshole.
Yeah, it is.
Rape isn't funny. We have one of your guys standing here saying rape is funny. Fuck you, you rapist asshole.
I'm not actually a rapist, and I don't actually think rape is funny. I was just saying that to get that little freak to flip his lid, which he did, and many a lulz was had. When I said that I don't care about men, I was stating a position that I actually hold, and rather than just doing it for an angry reaction to laugh at, I did it to make the point that I am now making in this YouTube debate. Not trolling, nice try.
And you did this all to support your conclusions about the community in order to build your narrative. Now, you say that what bothers you about my response to you and about MGTOW in general is...
Not MGTOW in general, just certain MGTOW. I'm not writing you off as some loud minority, but the people I have a problem with do not represent all MGTOW.
That we haven't taken the time to investigate people like Tom Golden or Tara from Shrink for Men, and you know that's a fair point. That is a fair point, or at least it would be coming from someone else. Even still, I will take the time to familiarize myself with their work as you suggested. But you see, the reason I said that I don't know enough about these two in my video was because I thought it best that if I'm ignorant in this matter, then I shouldn't comment. That, in my opinion, is the best thing to do because one can, in theory, not know every single member of the men's rights movement and still form an accurate general opinion of it.
Did I say the men's rights movement? Because I'm pretty sure that I said Tom and Tara's contributions were to A Voice for Men, which, as you know, is not the entirety of the men's rights movement. And I'm pretty sure I brought it up in reference to a trend among certain MGTOW who assert ad nauseum that AVFM doesn't help men. See, if one is going to go around saying that AVFM doesn't do anything to help men, and they're unfamiliar with the contributions those people have made to the site, then that one does not have an accurate general opinion of it. Tom and Tara are hardly obscure contributors to AVFM. Tara has been doing radio shows and hangouts with Paul for years. Tom has been doing hangouts with Paul and Warren Farrell. There's always a mental health corner in the sidebar of the site that features either Golden or Paul Altier, and they were both speakers at last year's ICMI.
But in this video, you start off your investigation of the YouTube MGTOW community and what we stand for by saying purposefully inflammatory things.
No, I was pretty familiar with the YouTube MGTOW community long before I made that video. Now, I know I promised you guys some footage of me and Girl Rights went down at the Walk a Mile in Her Shoes event. That footage was taken back in 2012, and as you can see, that's John the Other. I would have considered John a colleague up until sometime last year. I used to get his advice on a lot of my activism, and I would come to him with the problems that I was having within Men's Rights Edmonton. So I was sad to see him not only taking such an active role in, but also being the target of the current hostilities between A Voice for Men and certain MGTOW. I tried to stay out of it altogether until I got a Skype message from Diana Davison over Fiedelbogen's article about MGTOW being an impersonal force and how he would, quote, burn for this. Now, that's what got me investigating this whole conflict. I asked people from AVFM their side of the story. I've spoken with Karen about it. I've had Diana explain all her frustrations with A Voice for Men to me herself at length, and I even referenced the conversation that I had with Doom Rules about this in my initial video. Saying that I started my investigation with that particular YouTube video is the kind of ill-informed potshot that I have found to be used quite frequently by certain MGTOW. Now, I wasn't supporting my narrative by trolling. I was demonstrating my understanding that certain MGTOW will descend quite viciously on Manospherians for transgressions committed in their heads and in their hearts, which is where caring takes place.
Now, I disagree with your assertion of feminism being the enabler of gynocentrism in our society.
Good thing that's not what I said.
Western society is not, in my opinion, ostensibly egalitarian, but instead blatantly anti-male.
I think it's obviously anti-male, but not blatantly so. Yes, men make up the majority of the homeless and the incarcerated, etc., and everybody knows this. But no matter how badly men as a group are having it, and no matter how clearly that's seen by everyone, it is immediately excused by the orthodoxy that no matter how bad men have it, women have it worse, so it's not that important. When I was doing my intactivism, I found that a lot of the people that you bring this up with automatically go to, well, female circumcision is so much worse. And I would tell them that there are many different kinds of female genital cutting, some of which are actually far less invasive than male circumcision, and then the goalpost usually moved to religious freedom, and then I would point out that there is a Jewish intactivist group called Beyond the Bris. Then it was the choice of the parent, you know, and then health reasons, cleanliness, on it would go. So it's obvious that these people are anti-male. If they were blatant about it, however, they wouldn't bother doing so many mental gymnastics to justify doing something so unnecessary and so hazardous and so painful to an infant. So I don't think this enables gynocentrism, but there is a certain amount of effort to wear a mask of compassion and equity.
And I don't think that a feminist lie that women have historically been oppressed is the mechanism by which people offer themselves up as egalitarian, while at the same time being overtly gynocentric. Western civilization has displayed this tendency far longer than the advent of feminism. Western civilization, for example, abolished slavery, how long ago? 1865 officially? At least that's it in America's case, which I think is fair to use since America spawned feminism as we know it. And America, in doing so, was touted as a beacon of freedom and liberty for all.
I doubt they were so touted by Mexico, who abolished slavery in 1829, or the British Empire, who outlawed it in 1834.
And they portrayed themselves as paragons of egalitarian freedom, and all the while they were continuing to draft men until 1972, right? So that's 107 years later. And they continued with selective service up until today, up until the present, a full century and a half later. And how many men met their early graves on the battlefields through no choice of their own since this so-called abolishment of slavery? So please, don't tell me that feminism is what allows this to happen.
I'm not telling you that feminism is what allows this to happen. I'm telling you that it lets people do it more comfortably. Now, as with the example I gave about talking with people about intactivism, people are going to support infant circumcision even when all their justifications are dismantled, but they still hold those justifications just to make it easier.
Now, in your video that I've just mentioned, you grouped the oppositional force against feminism as a conglomerate of Manospherians, including MGTOW, men's rights activists, anti-feminists, PUAs, and others, namely traditionalists. Thus, I assume that you are happy to call them your allies in this quest to see feminism regarded in the same way wider society views racism.
You assume incorrectly.
Perhaps you don't care about men, Nick, but I assume that one of your reasons, and one of the reasons the vast majority of us fight feminism, is because even without caring about men, Their predatory vilification and exploitation of men is an act of aggression against the male sex that cannot be allowed to stand.
You assume incorrectly.
Now, you may say in response to this, Nick, that you only wish to collaborate with certain traditionalists and that you'll eschew the bad apples that exploit men and so on. But something tells me, for example, that if Phyllis Schlafly contacted either yourself or A Voice for Men or really any other men's rights outlet and asked you guys to do an interview or write an article on feminism, I think that her offer would be accepted by virtue of her being such a huge name in anti-feminism alone.
I can't speak for AVFM, but as for myself, you assume correctly. I have a very no such thing as bad publicity attitude.
Again, check out the white nationalist tradcons I linked to in my Stone response video, where racist traditionalist women call MRAs essentially autistic versions who impede the perpetuation of the white race. These women literally identified themselves as traditionalists, placing them within what you would call the activated non-feminist sector. Are we going to ally with them too, the racist tradcons, so we can join forces to make feminism fall into the same disrepute as racism?
No, that video is meant to be descriptive, not prescriptive. It's not meant to suggest allies. Fiedelbogen refuses to work with PUAs, and I put them in the activated non-feminist sector too. They don't even really fight feminism, but they do what they do knowing that they do it to the chagrin of feminists. So that qualifies them as activated non-feminists.
Now you say that you fight feminism and not feminists. And this is a bit of an unclear statement, and it fails to address the point I've made in my video that you conveniently left out here. That is, that at a certain point in time, enough attacks against Anita Sarkeesian, or any other feminist for that matter, will eventually be perceived by wider society as an attack against women. You say that you are waging a propaganda campaign against feminism, but it can't be a very good propaganda campaign if you're not aware of this, or if you choose to ignore this fact.
When I say that I fight feminism and not feminists, I mean that rather than nail certain offenders to the wall, I mean to disabuse society of the lie that women currently get or have historically gotten the short end of the stick. I am aware that a significant portion of society sees disagreeing with feminism as an attack on women, and you further expound on this here.
They accused Fiedelbogen of misogyny because they know that they can get away with this as a form of social proof. They know that when people see all that he talks about having to do with feminism, they immediately will assume he's anti-woman. Which, by the way, is exactly the same reason why this goal of seeing feminism fall into the same disrepute as racism is simply not possible, because in order to achieve this, you'd have to get wider society to see women in the same disrepute as racism as well. We all know that's not going to happen. Women and feminism, the two, whether you want to admit it or not, Nick, are inextricably linked. They are linked in the political arena, and most notably in women's voting booths. They are linked in the social sphere and in the consciousness of society. And there's a reason why MRAs have stopped using that phrase I talked about earlier in other videos that, women are a gender and feminism is an ideology. Right? We stopped using that, I suspect, because when you do say that to people, all you see happen is people's eyes glaze over for a split second while their brain recalls their default position on this subject. That default position is the subconscious understanding that feminism advocates on behalf of women, and to criticize it equates to an attack on women.
Yes, that does happen with a lot of people. But as I write this, Karen Strawn has 91,000 subscribers, Thunderfoot has 350,000, and Sargon of Akkad has 83,000. I continue to tell people that women are a gender and feminism is an ideology, or that there are male feminists and female anti-feminists, and some people get it and some people don't. If I'm not mistaken, I think you even said yourself in one of your videos that anti-feminism had become trendy on the internet. Women and feminism are linked in the public consciousness, but I don't believe that they are linked inextricably. I believe that this can be changed, and so do the people at AVFM. The more people that speak up against feminism, in particular the more women that speak up against feminism, the more feminism and women are parsed from each other. The people whose eyes glaze over will understand only when it is socially acceptable to understand. And that occurs when the activated non-feminist sector grows large enough, and it has been growing exponentially over the last few years thanks to AVFM and Women Against Feminism and the YouTube MGTOW community and the YouTube anti-feminists like The Amazing Atheists. I think the anti-feminist propaganda campaign is going swimmingly.
Now, when you say that I fight feminism and not feminists, I want to ask you, because that statement isn't very clear, whether or not fighting feminism involves repealing VAWA or primary aggressor laws, or securing equal funding for prostate cancer research, or alimony reform, or rape shield law reform, or anything that represents the actual power structure of feminism in the legislative arena. Because if not, then I fail to see how you aren't just arguing with feminists perpetually. I don't see how you aren't just bickering with idiots like Big Red at that point.
I can't remember in which one of Diana's videos she says this, but she stated, I believe correctly, that all those things you just mentioned were put into place largely because feminists have developed a public consensus that conforms to feminist dogma. So by growing the non-feminist sector, which is a loose amalgamation of people who, despite our many differences, are categorized by a consensus, among us anyways, that feminist dogma is bullshit, the existing consensus that all those things depend on is disrupted. The disruption not only aids the very few pro-male politicians, such as Canadian Senator Ann Cools, but informs and emboldens other politicians to take a stance as high-profile non-feminists themselves, who would otherwise be committing political suicide by taking a stand against the feminist powers that be. Bickering with idiots like Big Red would have been completely useless if it hadn't been captured on camera, and I don't think I have to tell you what kind of effect that has had on the current discourse surrounding feminism.
You say that it's for the benefit of the neutral observers to potentially sway them over to your side. But in my estimation, Nick, all this really does is to make people believe that there are some crazy feminists out there and some people who also have nothing better to do than to argue with them.
That's not all it does. Yes, there are people who have that averse reaction, but the legions of people following yourself, Karen, RBK, Dr. Randomer Thunderfoot, The Amazing Atheist, Sargon of Akkad, etc., etc., are a testament to the other side of that coin. Said side being the growth of the activated non-feminist sector. That is to say, the people who we have won over to our side by way of argumentation.
Debating feminists for the sake of neutral observers really does nothing to challenge the gynocentric notions that would have these same people marching in the streets if we did away with rape shield laws or VAWA, etc. Again, you've said you're running a propaganda campaign against feminism, or feminists, but no propaganda campaign can successfully curb our society's tendency to be gynocentric towards women, and that is exactly what feminism is. It's politicized gynocentrism. It's advocacy by the state on behalf of women. So, by all means, fight feminism all you want, but you're going to eventually hit the roadblock of female privilege every time. And this is when you have to ask yourself the question of why so many governments decided to enact these laws in the first place. Why did so many countries start passing feminist legislation like this? Why did so many countries in the West, and now even outside of the West, as we see in India and in other non-Western countries, why? Right? It wasn't the Federal Reserve. It wasn't Marxist. Those are just, at best, mechanisms by which the process of feminist governments was expedited, if they had any effect on the process at all. It was, again, technological advancements that freed up time and lifted reproductive burdens and kept women in relative comfort and safety that allowed them to mobilize as a political class and legislate their gynocentric instincts into law. Men, as we all know, are more than happy to pander to women, and thus they didn't put up much of resistance. And that's how we arrived at the point we're at today.
And this right here, I think, is the crux of our disagreement. Yes, society is and always has been gynocentric. Yes, feminism is a manifestation of that. But given that people swallow feminist bullshit like rape culture, wage gap myth, and patriarchy theory because of their existing gynocentric impulse to listen to and believe someone claiming to speak on behalf of women as a demographic, confronting feminism is a proxy confrontation of those tendencies. Now, if people are going to keep supporting VAWA, etc., in spite of feminism's demise, why are people fighting so hard to preserve feminism's legitimacy? Seriously, why enlist the help of Beyonce and Emma Watson and viciously attack female celebrities who simply say that they are not feminists if it would just be gynocentric business as usual without feminism?
Now, I gotta say that I disagree that an advocate for the rights of group XYZ caring about that group as a whole leads to the overall degeneration of the quality of said movement. right? In my opinion, what leads to the inevitable decline of these movements is not empathy or caring, but instead the desire for perpetual counter-revolution against an enemy to the point where it becomes an obsession and a dysfunctional one at that.
I didn't say that an advocate really caring is what damages a movement. I did say that some people are genuinely altruistic, while most people who claim altruistic motives are full of shit. And if it were the entire men's rights movement focusing on feminism as obsessively and as singularly as Fiedelbogen and I do, Fiedelbogen is not in the men's rights movement, your assessment of the MRM would be correct. But when said movement includes people like Aaron Pizzey, Warren Farrell, and the late Earl Silverman, when AVFM does things like fundraise for Cafe's Center for Men and Families, that shows that the MRM is not solely focused on feminism. What's more, when those of us who are solely focused on feminism have a stated endgame, then it's not just some never-ending battle.
What I want to ask you, Nick, is if you believe, do you believe that Malcolm X, one of the greatest civil rights leaders there was, didn't care about black people?
No, I don't believe that he didn't care about black people, but I don't know for sure that he did. Caring could have been what motivated him, but I've met Christian missionaries who say that they don't do acts of benevolence for the sake of the people they help, but just to score points with God. So it's possible that Malcolm X did what he did not out of compassion, but rather to demonstrate the actively benevolent nature of Islam, thereby ingratiating that faith within the African American community for the purpose of soul winning. I can't tell you for certain what his motives were, but I can tell you that his motives weren't what made history, his activism was. I'm sure there's plenty of blacks who cared about their community who didn't accomplish nearly as much as Malcolm X did. See, I'm not saying that caring in itself is a bad thing. I'm saying that when caring becomes more important than action, then false piety will abound and all kinds of lazy hypocrites can just adopt whatever flavor of ideological purity that's touted as equivalent to really caring. That is the ruination of a movement. And I'm going to come back to that in a bit.
I don't want to stop at just, well, let's just get rid of feminism and just let the chips fall where they may. Because if we do that, we'll just end up right back where we started, and we'll eventually culminate in feminism just under a different name. And then people like yourself, Nick, will think up another lexicology surrounding that. A lexicology that's built with custom specs designed to only address the new manifestation of feminism, which of course is really just plain old gynocentrism in another form.
Fiedelbogen and I actually acknowledge that we're just fighting a contemporary manifestation of something. I don't think it's just gynocentrism. I think it's more than that. I think that feminists and social justice warriors are a current manifestation of what were once the Pharisees, and both are manifestations of what Orwell would call the inner party. I do think that once we kick this thing's ass, it'll just regroup and come back later, only to be defeated by a new generation of champions, and that's the way it's going to go until Ragnarok.
Instead, we could be developing terms and language that address where it's all coming from in the first place in order to build a lasting syntax that will allow men 10,000 years into the future to read what we said and apply it in their lives.
That actually already exists. It's called logic.
Now, I don't have any problems with you getting attention in order to grow your community, and I've never said I do to my recollection. What I do have problems with is this acceptance of anybody and everybody who claims to be an anti-feminist into the men's rights movement. David Duke is an anti-feminist, and we don't let him into the men's rights movement because he's a racist idiot, more concerned with the welfare of the white women he worships than he is with men. So yes, we do exercise discernment, Nick, with just who we let into the men's movement, and we have been doing this for a while now. Therefore, I see no reason that if it can be proven that traditionalism practices an unacceptable amount of gynocentrism that on the whole harms men, that we can't tell them they don't belong here as well.
Gonna have to disagree with you there, Bar. If we could disallow people from entering this movement, I have no doubt that we would take a vote and tell Peter Nolan to take a long walk off a short pier, but he's here and the rest of us just do what we can to distance ourselves from that nut job.
And that's probably the genesis, frankly, of this entire dispute. That MRAs think that they can tell the largest MGTOW community in the manosphere, which is the one that exists here on YouTube, that we should accept married men, even though there's no way that's going to happen, period.
I don't think that anyone is telling you that you have to accept married men. Paul Elam stated his opinion that technically MGTOW can marry, and Janet Bloomfield spoke critically of you, but as far as I know, no one is telling you what to do.
Now, you mentioned the Earl Silverman Center and how MGTOWs are ignoring tangible results you made in the furtherance of this Earl Silverman Center.
No, I mentioned the MASH house. That was the men's shelter that Earl was actually running before he passed away. The Earl Silverman Center was supposed to be in memoriam, and had Earl gotten the amount of the help that he needed to run that shelter, he would be more than just a memory.
But Nick, you have to know what I'm going to say to you in response to such a claim, since one could easily make the argument that it was A Voice for Men's failure to vet people like Willie Bumblebee and her subsequent catapult into the upper echelons of A Voice for Men that set the stage for the complete and utter failure that was the Earl Silverman Center. You see, in the haste to just find any and all women claiming to be an anti-feminist in the men's rights movement, MRAs allowed what later became to be known as a virally anti-male and anti-MGTOW misandrist like Willie Bumblebee to take charge of the hard-earned money that MRAs donated to fund the Earl Silverman Center, which resulted in her absconding with the money, thousands of dollars if I recall, and spending it on her kids or a minivan or some shit.
Now that I do agree with. It was a fuck-up on the part of AVFM, and for exactly the reasons that you stated.
Now, I've heard some people say that she gave the money back. Doubtful, in my opinion. But I'll entertain that notion. How do we know this? We don't know who donated, and we don't know if everyone who did donate received their money back in full.
Men's Rights Edmonton donated $350 to that, and we did not get 1 cent back.
And frankly, this type of shit really infuriates me, because Earl Silverman, you know, he seemed like a genuinely good human being, man. He didn't deserve that kind of treatment. He didn't deserve to have his memory tarnished like that because we can't be bothered to look past the simplistic hyperfixation on feminism. He deserved better. We owed him more than that.
Oh, pour a fucking beer on the ground for him, why don't you? This is exactly the kind of false piety I was talking about. AVFM helped Earl while he was alive. I did. Karen did. Mad Shangy did. And now all of the people who didn't do fuck all to help him while he was alive go on and on and on about how AVFM fucked up his legacy, all because pointing a finger at the occasional failure of people who actually do shit is easier than pitching in and helping. But hey guys, pat yourselves on the back for all that fucking caring that you do. Anyway, this next part is in reference to the part in my last video where I said that clearing one's name is not the same thing as smearing your accuser, which was in reference to the reward for Danielle d'Entremont's alleged assailant.
Clearing whose name, Nick? The man that you guys believe didn't even exist? Him? Now, if I'm accused of a crime, and I don't believe that this crime even happened, setting up a reward fund for the capture of who I believe didn't do it is essentially shifting the blame for a fictional crime, and it does more to validate the accusation of the false accuser than it does to prove your own innocence. And let's take this little reward posting to its logical conclusion here, just so we see how foolhardy it really was. Best case scenario, what you said happened did in fact occur. Feminists failed to produce an assailant, but I believe that they would have failed to produce this same assailant without offering a reward for his capture on our part. Thus, even in the best scenario, there was zero net benefit to posting the reward.
The benefit to posting the reward was demonstrating that the men's rights movement is both non-violent and self-policing. On April 9th, 2014, Staff Sergeant Shauna Grimes of the Edmonton Police Service participated in a panel discussion called Taking Action, #YEG Secret Exposed, and it was all about rape culture and how to end it.
Staff Sergeant Shauna Grimes, an officer with Edmonton Police Service. She's worked with EPS for 21 years. Previously as an investigator with the Homicide Section and the Alberta Serious Incident Response Team, and now with the Sexual Assault Section. So, thank you to all of our panel.
She's the one on the left who waved when her name was said. The reward was posted on April 15th, 2014, and shortly after that, because the panel did briefly discuss the postering done by Men's Rights Edmonton, I was worried that this high-ranking police officer may have heard some troubling things about MRAs from her feminist buddies. I gave her a call just to introduce myself and to explain the nature of my activism, and she was already familiar with the alleged assault, and I really liked being able to tell her about the reward the MRM had posted while explaining that my activism was nonviolent.
Which kind of, I think, speaks to this issue in Edmonton. The "Don't Be That Guy" posters. Of course, the visual language of that has been taken and used for this completely other campaign.
In the worst case scenario, feminists would have produced someone they framed and would have profited financially from doing so. Now, you say here that what you predicted, and that's an important key word there in the video, what you predicted, because of course it implies that it was a risk with some degree of uncertainty. You say that your prediction actually happened, as though that eliminates or invalidates the risk that was taken in getting the desired result. Now, if I'm playing poker at a casino and I put all the money I've accrued on the line in a bet, let's say $10,000 worth, and I win, this doesn't mean that I didn't take a risk in going all in. I very well could have not won and then lost $10,000. The only difference between the poker game I'm using as an analogy and the reward that MRA is offered is that if I win, there's a sizable amount of money and benefit coming my way. You say feminists are bullies, and I respond to that by saying, what better way to entice a bully than to tell him that if he bullies us correctly, there's also a financial incentive in it for him. You simply cannot say that feminists who are indeed victimhood tyrants who are accusing some, as of today, still fictional man who assaulted her, that providing a reward for what you believe to be a fictional man's crime is anything less than a gamble, and a dangerous one at that.
Oh, bullshit. This isn't high-stakes gambling, it's investing in blue-chip stock. The reward is for any information leading to the arrest and conviction of the man who allegedly assaulted Danielle d'Entremont. Between all the groups agreeing to pay out, the reward currently sits at $4,000, and I am so certain that no one will claim this reward that I will send $100 to you, Barbar, if anyone ever does claim it. Like I said, I think you have a lot of really good insights, Barbarossa, but honestly, I think you misunderstand a lot of what A Voice for Men and the men's rights movement in general does. Paul Elam apparently agrees, since he put my last response to you up on AVFM, and in the comments section of that entry, he posted the following challenge to you, and I do hope that you accept. And even if you don't, I look forward to hearing your response to this video, because I'm Nick Redding, mensrightsedmonton.com.